Over the past 10 years, I've read 31 books on public speaking, and every single time I noted down the one key insight per book. To save you hours and hours of reading, I'll give you my 5 biggest insights I learned on this journey. Insight number 1. Imagine standing in this room at this beautiful wedding location. You've just been asked to give a speech, but you're freaking out. You're thinking, fuck, why did I say yes to this? But right in that moment, the best man comes by, sees how nervous you are, and says, don't worry, just be calm, just be yourself and everything will be fine. Now, that is terrible advice. We've all been told before, just relax, just be calm, just be yourself. That never works. When we try to be calm, we just get more anxious. But good thing is there is something else that we can do. In 2014, Harvard Business School professor Alison Woodbrooks ran a fascinating experiment. She invited 140 students to deliver a 2 to 3 minute speech on camera about why they would be a good work partner. But she asked the participants to do one thing before. One group was asked to tell themselves, I'm calm, before. The other group was asked to tell themselves, I'm excited. Now, what did she find? She found that participants who said, I'm excited, were rated as more persuasive, more confident, and even more competent compared to those who said, I'm calm. Now that leads me to the first insight. Reframe anxiety as excitement. The next time you get nervous, don't try to push it away. That never works. But instead, tell yourself, I'm excited. Tell yourself, say it out loud a few times. I'm excited, I'm excited, I'm excited. And you'll feel significantly more confident when it matters. Remember, nerves, they are like waves on the ocean. You can't stop the waves, but you can learn how to surf them. But let's now move to the second insight. That insight has probably been the one insight that has had the biggest impact on my speaking journey. Insight number 2. There are 2 types of people, givers and takers. Now, for most of my life, I was a taker. Every time I gave a presentation, I wanted something from my audience. I wanted applause. I wanted people to admire me. I wanted people to buy my stuff. I was a taker. But the problem is, as a taker, my presentations were okay, but never really great. People like you, like my audience, you're sensitive to social cues. You can tell if I'm genuine, if I want to help, or if I just want to sell you something. Now that brings me to insight number 2. Show up with the giver's mindset. I learned that from Simon Sinek, the author of Start With a Why. People with a giver's mindset, they want to help their audience. They want to pull them in. They want to inspire them. They want to change their audience's perspective. But how can you actually make that shift? How can you become a giver? There are 2 things that I do every single time before giving a presentation or also recording a video like this. First, I repeat in my head, you're here to give. You're here to give. You're here to give. That usually gets me already pretty far. But I do a second thing, and that is I think of how I will help my audience. Do I help them solve a certain problem? Do I help them achieve this desired result? Or do I even just bring some fun in their boring days? I actually go so far and I imagine a specific person in my audience that I will help. By visualizing that specific person really benefiting from my content, I start to get this warm feeling of gratitude. Making this change from taking to giving has really been the single most important change that I have made on my speaker journey. But there is another insight that changed, I would say, the format of my presentations. Insight number 3. Have you ever been at a lecture, you love the speaker and you think, wow, this content is so freaking cool, but then next day you pretty much forgot everything about it? Or I guess, is that just me? But probably there are a few of you. Now, before we start blaming our poor memory for everything that goes wrong, let me tell you, the problem is not our memory, but the problem is how content is taught. Let me share a model that shows you how people remember information. All the way at the bottom, you have the lecture, which is the most common format. Now, when you hear a lecture, you retain more or less 5% of the information. and that is the most common format. Next, you have reading. And reading is a little bit better, but still you only retain 10% of what you've read. So still quite little, right? After reading, you then have the discussion. So when you discuss whatever you've learned with a group, your learning retention already increases to 50%, which is already much better. But hey, there are two more, which are even more effective. Next, practice by doing. If you can somehow practice or do an activity live, that will boost your learning retention to 75%. So already getting much higher. But hey, there is one final one that most presenters miss, and that is teach others. At the top of the pyramid, this is the most effective way to learn, is to teach others. When you explain something to someone else, you retain about 90% of that information. Which now brings me to the third insight: turn students into teachers. Let's say you're giving that speech, and at one point you will share this super important thing. Now, once you share that, don't just rush to the next point. Instead, ask your audience members to turn to their neighbors and explain the concept that they have just learned. Now, the moment that they become the teacher, they'll remember that part for really the rest of their life. Let's actually try this with this video. After watching this video, I invite you to share what you've learned today with the next person you see. Sure, that person might think that you're super eager, but keep in mind that after you share that, you'll remember your insights for the rest of your life. Lesson number 4. In my previous role as a consultant at Bain & Company, I had one job: PowerPoint slides. Sure, on paper I did lots of other fancy stuff, but if I'm honest to myself, 90% of my work was to create PowerPoints. But hey, I actually didn't mind that much. In every new project, I just worked for weeks and weeks to create these most beautiful slides possible. But interestingly, despite really my best efforts, my presentations were still pretty average at best. Now, why was that? Because I was a slide delivery person. I moved out of the spotlight to make space for the slides. I turned my back towards my audience to read from the slides. I made the slides the protagonist of my presentation. And it's not only me, most presenters make exactly the same mistake. But you don't have to. Which brings me to insight number 4. You are the star, not your slides. Use your slides as that visual aid to enhance your presentation. Your audience is there for your experience, your passion, your personality, your presence, and not for your presentation. So, how can you do that? First, blank the screen more often. Now, you don't always have to show the slides. When you're sharing a story or when you're sharing a part where slides are not needed, don't show the slides. You can do that by putting the background as white or as black. There are actually keyboard shortcuts for that. So you can press W for white, or you can press B for black, and that will just help to not always focus on the slides. Second, replace text with images. Now, we as humans, we are super visual creatures. If you were to read a text alone, well, you would remember probably like 10% 3 days after. But if you were to see a relevant image along with those words, you'd likely remember 65% of that information 3 days later. So if you want your audience to remember more of your presentation, try to include a few relevant images, graphs, or diagrams to really support your message. And lastly, eliminate unnecessary details. Most of our slides, they read like they're notes for the presenter and not really notes for the audience. Oftentimes they're so freaking packed with text, graphs, everything is just chaos. Impossible for anyone really to digest. What I invite you to do is, once you have a first draft, go through each slide and each object and ask yourself, would eliminating this change anything? If it doesn't change anything or doesn't add any value, eliminate it. I regularly cut about 50% of my slide content because I realized that it's not helping my audience. I see too much unnecessary details in a lot of slides. But there are 2 more mistakes I see more towards the end of the presentation. Insight number 5. First mistake. We're done for today. Are there any questions? The mistake is that people end with Q&A. That is a terrible idea. You don't know what questions will come up. What if you get a rather hostile question? Or what if you get a question that is not really a question, but just some random person that is interested in sharing their 3-minute monologue? That would suck, right? That would suck because that would be the last impression that people have from your presentation. Yes, you can have a Q&A, but plan to finish on a pre-planned note after your Q&A. Second mistake. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening. Whoops, we are out of time. Well, thank you very much for listening. Second mistake is that people don't think about their closing. Maybe they prepared some nice opening, they shot some really cool arguments, but they don't think about how they will close their presentation. That is a missed opportunity. Keep in mind that this last minute, that's the last impression that people have from your presentation. This is what they remember, which brings me to the last insight. Finish with a killer closing. Finish your presentation with that pre-planned closing statement. Closing statement that recaps the main point, that leaves them with that positive feeling and has that simple call to action. Example, the last thing I want to leave you with is this. Show up with a giver's mindset. When you focus on helping others, you build trust, you inspire those around you. You leave an impact that goes far beyond this moment. Show up to give. Thank you. That's it. Those are my 5 big insights from reading 31 books on public speaking. But hey, there are a few techniques that we didn't talk about today. If you want to give this most captivating speech on this planet, you may want to check out this next video in which I share my favorite public speaking techniques. Enjoy.